Welcome to Smalls Talks Balls, presented by Champions Round. And now your host, Steph Smalls.
Happy Thursday, everyone. Smalls Talks Balls is back. I, of course, am your host, Steffi Smalls. We're switching things up a little bit. I did not finish the AFC North. I know I'm taking my time in good Steph fashion, but that's okay because Jakob and I have had this date to talk about the Colts for a very long time. So we are headed to the AFC South. And with me, I had to bring on my dear friend, co-founder of Colts Tilt Dynasty and a lead analyst at Player Profile. How are you doing, Jakob?
I'm doing good. I'm excited. So often, I'm always doing fantasy shows and I don't get to talk about actual football very often and anything beyond like three positions. So I'm pumped. Every once in a while I can dive in to do Colts conversations. I'm always excited about it. So this is great. And you scheduled me on a day that the Celtics aren't playing. So that's a
How do we do that?
Both my teams represented today.
I love it. I know you're coming off the Celtics, right?
We scheduled like a month ago and we had no idea. Yeah. I mean, I didn't even know they'd be in the finals. So this is fun.
Yeah. I did poor planning for my Rangers, which is fine. But whatever. It's a little bit too much stress for me anyway, so I'm okay with it. Before we jump in, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you, anything that's coming up, anything you just did, whatever you want to plug quick, and then we'll jump right into these Colts because they are very fascinating to me.
Well, you can find me on Twitter, of course, FF_RTDB, run the damn ball. And you can find me, like Steph said, on Full Tilt Dynasty podcast every Tuesday. I usually stream best ball drafts and stuff on there on Saturdays. And then you can find me on Dynasty Intervention on Wednesdays. And then you can find me in the Bulletproof Discord as well. I got my channel in there. And the Full Tilt Discord just recently launched. That's free to join. So you can check out the link that's pinned over on the on @Dynasty Tilt, our Twitter account there. So lots of places to chat.
And if you play fantasy football and you are not following Jakob, I don't really know entirely what you're doing. He's fantastic. So go check him out. But we are here to talk about the Colts. We will touch about fantasy a little bit because I do want to talk about a couple guys on this team. But let's talk about the draft. Give me your overall feelings. How do we feel? Are we happy? I'm happy. I went over and looked this over. I guess I was so blinded by after the first round of the Giants, I just passed out and kind of missed bits and pieces. But the Colts had a nice draft. So talk to me about this draft.
So I had kind of mixed feelings about the draft. I mean, it was always tough coming in because, of course, our first round pick is a player that's no longer on the team. So that sort of made it a little bit tough coming in. But everything that Ballard did this offseason, I thought was as great as he really could have done structurally. Like the whole offseason really started right with what they did at quarterback. I mean, they got, in my opinion, a clearly better quarterback, and they got an extra pick on top of it, going from Wentz to Matt Ryan. So that was phenomenal. And then in terms of what they were able to do with the draft, I love what they did structurally. They came in, they identified, okay, we need to add extra picks. Mm-hmm. We don't have that first. So they trade down in the second, and then they trade back up into the third. And so it results in them getting 2 additional third-round picks than what they had coming in, right? Originally they had 2. They trade 1 for Matt Ryan, then they get 2 extras. So I love that just structurally in terms of them diagnosing a pocket in the draft that they wanted, especially with there being a wider, deeper pool in the draft this year in that top 100 because of all the folks who stayed in school last year with the COVID year. Right. So I thought it was really smart what they were able to do maximizing that third round. The pick that I probably liked the least, honestly, was the pick that they took first, which was Alec Pierce. I'm not a huge Alec Pierce fan. But overall, they came in. I was like, please give me a wide receiver round 2. They traded back. They got the position they needed. So I'm not that upset about it. And I love what they did in round 3, which I'm sure we'll get to.
Right. So they were able to trade back from that number 42 and they added an extra third. And then you do get Alec Pierce. So you are lower on him. I'm probably higher on him than you are, obviously. So do you think that it's possible for him to win this wide receiver 2 role? Or is because he feels like a seamless fit. But again, this is why I have people on that are fans and, this is, you guys are diehards for your team, your team through and through. So is he not necessarily the guy that his route running does need development. But again, once you start dipping into that second round, we're talking about guys that they're going to have knocks like that. So talking about Alec Pierce, and I guess we'll jump right into this wide receiver room because it's a very interesting one.
Yeah, Pierce is interesting because as soon as I started looking at the wide receivers, I was like, oh, Ballard's taking this guy because he has such a type at wide receiver. He always takes the super athletic dudes He loves a guy that's been to the Senior Bowl. And so like as soon as I saw, I was like, we got this big, fast, outside burner, senior wide receiver. They loved him. And I thought they were doing like some feigning interest in Desmond Ridder just so they could go and see Pierce under the guise of Ridder interest. It was pretty clear that was the guy they were looking at. What I don't love about Pierce, I think he's a little bit limited, and I think that he is a little bit redundant with pretty much the only wide receiver they have that's worth a dang outside of him, which is Michael Pittman. And in that, he's going to be a guy who's purely a boundary wide receiver. I don't think that he has the ability to separate a lot in the intermediate area of the field. So I think he's pretty much going to be a burner at this point in time and a guy that they can hope can do a lot in contested areas down the field. I think what was missing most from their offense last year was the guys who could make plays in space and separation ability in the intermediate areas of the field, because their offense really devolved when they weren't running the ball. Was pretty much like either they're throwing these contested targets to Pittman, or if they were taking Pittman away, they just had nothing because TY doesn't have the wheels anymore, and after that, they really had nobody else. So I'm glad they took a wide receiver. I was hopeful they would look at, Sky Moore was the guy I really wanted there, just because I thought he was a little bit more of a versatile piece, a little bit more of a space piece, a guy that could play inside or outside. But obviously, they diagnosed a need, and I think what this means is they still have a little bit of hope left for Parris Campbell, which is like kind of foolhardy to me. But I think they would like him.
I know, but don't you want him to be? Don't you want it for Parris Campbell? I want it for Parris Campbell.
I would love it. I love Parris Campbell so much, like with all my heart. If he ever could actually string it together and be healthy, he's everything they need. He has the wheels to get deep. He has the ability to make plays in space, a gadget player. He can be their slot guy, and he can be sort of a speed slot. I would love to see it happen. As for your original question about Pierce, like he's not my favorite prospect, but unless he's a total stone disaster in camp, he's starting, because look at this depth chart. It's like barren. It's literally barren. Right. Like they have T.Y. Hilton is not on the team. I don't know if he'll end up coming back or not. If he does, he's a rotational guy at best. He's basically a mascot at this point. Or like a wide receivers coach. They lose Zach Pascal, who's been like weirdly a big part of their team for multiple years now. Just by default. So he's off in Philly. And after that, like the guy that's the talk at camp right now, who I don't know if you're going to get any fantasy utility, but he's going to play a lot of snaps for them early in the season, is Ashton Dulin.
Really?
Is going to be. Yeah, I think he's going to be starting in 3 wide receiver sets. Like I think their starting wide receiver set to open the season is honestly going to be Dulin playing potentially in the slot, or at least rotating with Campbell alongside Pierce and Pittman as the boundary receivers, because Dulin can do a lot for them. It's a team that's going to run a lot of 12 personnel. They draft another tight end who I'm sure we'll get to, and they have 2 left over on the roster that I like. And so Dulin's a guy who can play. Like last year, he was pretty much only a motion player. So, they would line him up. They would do jet sweeps with him. But I think that he can do a little bit more. I think also if they can't rely on Campbell, he's a guy that can place the slot for them. And apparently he's been ripping it up in camp. So we'll see. But I don't think he's a fantasy option. But I've taken Ashton Dulin in round 18 of some best ball drafts, to be entirely honest.
Really?
And I don't think that it's out of the question that he could be, potentially their number 3 receiver, or even in the first month, their second most productive wide receiver.
Yeah, and I think the thing with Pierce is I agree, like there's a lot of this, he has the skill to start immediately and make an impact. And a lot of that comes down to he's not competing with much.
Space is open for him.
What?
He will be as productive this year as he is capable of being. I'm not the biggest Pierce fan in the world, but I'm drafting him in best ball for sure. I think Matt Ryan's going to be fine. Pittman's going to have a great year, but beyond Pittman, it is nothing else. The other thing that I would note is Nyheim Hines set a career high last year with 122 pass routes out wide. So in addition to what he's doing at running back, the reality is 2 of their 3 best skill players right now play running back in, Hines, Taylor, and Pittman. Hines played a little bit of slot wide receiver at NC State. I wouldn't be surprised if he also mixes into the slot. I think they're going to do a lot of funky sets this year where they'll have 2 boundary wide receivers in Pierce and Pittman. And then beyond that, I think they'll mix up their tight ends. They'll play, Dulin can play as an H-back running jet sweeps. They can do Campbell in the same role. They can do Hines in the same role. And so I think they're going to have a lot of sets where they're going to have multiple players bunched to the line, and it'll be a mix and match between tight ends, running backs, and wide receivers, quite frankly, depending on what they want to do. So I think it's going to be like, I don't think it's going to be a clear answer. I think they're going to use a lot of sub packages.
For sure. And I think that's going to work to their advantage because they're going to keep defenses like very, very honest in that way because they do have the weapons and they do have all those different, there's so many packages that they can run. Mm-hmm. And I want to stay on Pittman while we're here. And since you are a fantasy guy, we will talk about him because for a while, which I think he is picking up steam when the crazies, like some of us, are drafting very early, he was a little bit undervalued. And I think going into his third season, you saw him almost double his production from his rookie year. Where are we taking Pittman? What is his ceiling? Like, talk to me about Pittman in fantasy.
I mean, Pittman's ceiling is massive. Absolutely massive. I understand that people think the Colts are going to be super run heavy, and they will be run heavy to an extent. But like Frank Reich throughout his history has not been, a particularly dogmatic coach in terms of his run pass ratio. Like if you go back from his previous stops to LA, to the Chargers, to the Colts, like he's had some of the most run heavy offenses. He's had some of the most pass heavy offenses. He's going to call the scheme that works for the personnel that he has. And last year they just reached a point where like Hilton he just lost his legs. Campbell was on the shelf. They had, Pascal was just not producing anything. And Wentz was struggling. So they couldn't pass the ball effectively. Like they had one receiver and a bad quarterback, and their pass protection was eroding because they had Eric Fisher, who is a total turnstile. So really all they could do is run. And they ran a ton, but I don't think that that's like Reich's desire. Like, I don't think this is like a Titans level team where it's like in their identity that they want to run the ball constantly. I think Reich would like to have a more balanced offense. And I mean, if we're going to see potentially in the upper 500s in pass attempts, like I don't see how Pittman doesn't get to 150 targets. He had over a 25% target share last year as a year two player. I mean, Matt Harmon's been dropping these reception perception profiles. Pittman's looks phenomenal. And he's a guy that is capable, I think, of earning as high of a target share as potentially of anyone in the league, quite honestly, in terms of just a mix of the depth chart around him and his own abilities. And I think also having a guy in Pierce who can stretch the field, even if he's not necessarily earning a whole lot of volume for himself, just having a guy who can go deep, clear things up a little bit for Pittman. I mean, we've seen Matt Ryan just absolutely load up wide receivers in the past, be that Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley. So I think that Pittman has like 160, 170 target upside in him, honestly. And I could see him being a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy fairly easily if he's able to capitalize.
Absolutely. And I think you saw like his best stats came from those first 9-10 games. And then, you did see a sharp decline in his production, but a lot of that comes from the fact that they had to shift very heavily onto the run game to compensate for where Wentz was not doing what he needed to do. So, and I think that people downplay Matt Ryan. I am like the biggest, I don't want to say Matt Ryan fan, but I think Matt Ryan, like him and Kirk Cousins are two guys that like will always have my heart because I think
I stand these guys so hard.
I do too. And I love it because it's like, especially in redraft and like single QB leagues, it's like, I don't care. Take whatever quarterback you want. I'm going to wait till the end and I'm going to get these guys that deliver the same stuff every single year. And I think Matt Ryan, like you said, is like, he does have this history of delivering high ranking results for his top wideout on that team. And kind of like we talked about before is like, it's not a very deep room. Some of these teams have very deep wide receivers. This is not a deep room. Like we don't need to like try to figure out who the top wideout is. Like we know who it is. And I think that, yes, there's, you look at what he did with Julio Jones I don't care. It's like Julio Jones is his own beast. And I think that Matt Ryan is going to be a really big deal for this team that has, this is a great, I don't know. You could say bridge quarterback, I guess, because obviously he's on the tail end of his career, but I think he puts you guys in a really good place.
Yeah. And I think it's totally possible. Like it's funny that this is the case because this was almost the case even before he came to the Colts, but now I'm just going to homer it up. Like he's my most rostered dynasty quarterback. Because I don't think that he's only here for 1 year. I think it's entirely possible that he's there for multiple years. I don't think Matt Ryan is washed at all. Like, I'm sure the end is coming. No. I don't think it's yet. If you look last year, like there was a stretch from week 4 through week 9 where he was PFF's highest graded quarterback. Like, I was watching a lot of Matt Ryan tape after he got traded to the Colts, especially. And like, I think he's fine. His deep ball certainly isn't what it used to be, but he's still an elite processor. He still has great accuracy. And I mean, Atlanta just fell in on itself last year. They were essentially playing Pitts as a wide receiver after Ridley, unfortunately, had to step away from the team. And so you had a situation where Kyle Pitts was a tight end playing receiver as a 20-year-old, getting constant double coverage, and they had like nobody else. I mean, we're talking about the Colts being a bad situation. The Atlanta Falcons wide receiver core last year, especially in some of the games that Gage was injured, it was like freaking a mess. I mean, they were starting Olamide Zaccheaus. That's a guy that was out.
I don't even know how they won as many games as they did.
They were bad. I mean, their offensive line was a total trash heap. And Matt Ryan, I mean, the one thing he can't do is move. Like, he is a pylon back there. So if you have no O-line and you have no receivers, I mean, it's a disaster. So I think he's in a good situation. I don't know that Matt Ryan's going to be putting up a lot of fantasy numbers necessarily, but I think that he can supply fantasy numbers for others. And certainly, like, as a QB2 in Superflex formats, like, he's like dirt cheap right now. He's going in the tier of guys, you know, like Jared Goff's. And I mean, he's not even that much more expensive than like the guys who potentially don't have jobs by week 8. Right. So I think Matt Ryan is a nice, like, cheap guy, and I think he'll be great for this team.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes from too, because he is, you know, you think, and I think the problem is the league has turned into this, like, if you are not a mobile quarterback, we hate you. If you are not a mobile quarterback in fantasy football, we hate you. We don't like you. I don't, you know, you can still be very productive, and a lot of that comes from the O-line. So we'll switch gears to the O-line because I do want to talk about it. I'm sure you want to talk about it because we have Raymond, got taken third in the 3rd round, I think number 77 overall. Fantastic.
Lucky.
I mean, this is a kid I loved. I kind of knew he was going to fall a little bit. Originally, a lot of people had him that end of the 1st round. I probably had him like an early 2nd. You guys got him in the 3rd. So a lot of that comes from kind of being a little bit older, I think it is. And I think that he had 2 seasons worth of starting at left tackle. He moved over from tight end, but he picked up this position very fast. And a lot of that sloppiness and the knocks that you get on him come from the fact that he hasn't played the position very long, and he's doing a damn good job for someone that hasn't. So talking about the O-line and what that means for Prime, how do they make this work? Because I think he starts week 1. I really do.
I think it's totally possible. First of all, fascinating fact, probably only to me, but this will be the 2nd straight year they have a Central Michigan left tackle after going from Eric Fisher.
And I just moved to Michigan, so I'm like all in.
So
I'm like
go Chippewas.
Love it.
I think this O-line is fantastic, or fascinating to talk about, because last year was this weird phenomenon where it was kind of like what happened to the Cowboys 2 or 3 years ago, where no one really knows anything about O-lines. So there's like this lag effect where people's perception of O-lines is always lagging about a year behind what actual O-lines are. So, for instance, for all these luck years, the O-line was a total burning tire fire. And then the first Andrew Luck year, the O-line was incredible when they had gone out and they got Glowinski, New York Giant. They have Braden Smith in his 2nd year, I believe. That was his rookie year, Quentin Nelson's rookie year. And they got this O-line that went from trash to awesome out of nowhere. But for like half the year, people still thought the O-line was trash because it was trash before. And then eventually, by the time that everyone realized the Colts had a great O-line, they kind of didn't anymore. Because Anthony Costanzo, who's been the rock of the Colts O-line for 10 years, retired. They replaced him with a rotting husk of Eric Fisher, who's just awful last year, like absolutely awful. They had injuries constantly. Quentin Nelson was banged up. He was not himself for most of last year. Braden Smith was injured almost the entirety of last year. And so, they were guys that were playing O-line for the Colts. But I remember the Christmas game against the Cardinals. I think they had 0 week 1 starting O-linemen available. And I mean, it was a joke. They were running like these 7-man max protects with tight ends out there because they couldn't block anything. So it's interesting now. I think people have realized that they actually did need help on the O-line. And I think that one of the 2 guys they're going to need 2 of these 3 guys to step up, which will be Matt Pryor, who's projected right now as their potential day 1 starter at left tackle. And then Raymond, who you just mentioned, who's the rookie they drafted, who might start at left tackle. And then Danny Pinter right now is their projected week 1 starter right guard. I think the best case scenario is if Raymond's ready, that he starts day 1 left tackle. Matt Pryor came into this league originally as a guard. His first start in the NFL with the Eagles 3 years ago was at guard on Matt with Frank Reich back then. And so I think that he potentially starts at right guard, which was his first NFL position. They have Raymond at left tackle. And then you're going to have Braden Smith and Quentin Nelson back at full health. And then Ryan Kelly missed a ton of time last year with a really disheartening personal matter. So I think if you have the 3 studs at full health, and then you just need, 1 or 2 of these other guys, I think it'll be a huge help. And I mean, right guard on the Colts is, sort of an interesting position because everything their whole run game is all out of the left guard with Quentin Nelson, where everything is about him pulling, right? That's really what their whole run game scenario is about. Yeah. So you're going to have numbers. I think Pryor's going to be fine. And then, it's just a matter of can they hold up at left tackle, because that's been the problem area since Costanzo retired. And I think Raymond or Pryor, whoever's the person manning left tackle on the team, is going to be probably the most important person on this team this year in terms of whether they can step up to the plate.
Right. And I think that it maybe Pryor, he does go back to that right guard, and that's the right fit. And sometimes the guys around them, as a New York Giants fan, I watched last year how one guy off in the wrong spot, not fitting the place that they need to be, how that can throw everyone off. But I also have seen how it can lift people. I think ultimately the one thing I noticed with him is working on that technique in past sets. But again, this is a guy has very shortened experience compared to most guys that are walking in. He played tight end. He has about 2 years worth of starting experience. I think that you're in a good spot, at least as far as the O-line is better than I think people give them credit for. But we have to talk about the tight ends. We'll get over the O-line. Go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to say, if there's one guy that the Raymond situation kind of reminds me of was I remember they drafted Joe Haig back in 2015 out of North Dakota State. And it was this developmental small school left tackle. He ended up starting week 1. And I thought he was okay. He battled and he had some good years for them. It'll be interesting. There's a little bit of a legacy of guys from these small schools coming in and starting pretty quickly with Indy at the O-line. And it'll be interesting to see if that continues.
I love it. And he has everything you want. And I think the brand for the Colts, when I went back and started looking it over, when I got out of my weird Giants amnesia, only focusing in on that, is on brand was just athleticism. That's what they went for in this draft. Everyone was just an athletic specimen. And you saw that also, right? Talking about the tight ends, you look at Jelani Woods, who really was not, I'll admit it, I'll be the first, he wasn't really on my radar until the combine. That's when he kind of hit my radar. That's when I'm oh, let me look at this kid. This is he's piquing my interest. And then he goes to the Colts, who, Mo Alley Cox and whose grandson is there.
Yeah, Granson.
It's cool, but it doesn't get you going. You're not hell yeah. The Colts have a sweet tight end room. Not really. I think that Jelani Woods is awesome. Again, you get a guy that is, people want to talk about all these. People don't realize that COVID took a hit on everyone. Yes, everyone seems geriatric because there was a pandemic and they all played a little bit longer. So yes, he's a little bit older, but the prime for tight ends really is a little bit older than people realize. And he has that time to develop his skills into becoming an elite receiving option for this team, which again, here we go, adding to the receiving room a little bit more. You get that also in Jelani Woods, and you saw him be really productive. He did only have 1 season for Virginia. But it was better than those 4 seasons he had at Oklahoma State. So I'm all in on Jelani Woods. I think that, again, he's another guy people are just forgetting about. I'm seeing it happen in, rookie drafts and best ball. I kind of like taking it. I don't know if he's going to, there's starters ahead of him, but I don't know how many weeks it really takes to kick one out. I don't know that's, you tell me, because you're the Colts fan here.
Well, so Woods is interesting. Another like Raymond who switched positions. He was actually recruited out of high school as a quarterback. He was a top 25 quarterback recruit.
All these guys.
And he's now 6'7", 259. So I mean, what a change. I think people are getting maybe slightly ahead of themselves with Woods. He seems to be the consensus second tight end drafted in most rookie drafts.
Really?
And I think that, yeah, and I think that that's fine. Like, I think McBride clearly is being the tight end 1 drafted. Personally, my tight end 2 in the class is Dulcich, who, of course, we'll talk about when you do Broncos. And what I like about Dulcich more is that he's more that traditional move tight end. I think Jelani Woods is a guy that eventually they're hoping could be an every down tight end for them, as an inline player who's also a receiving threat. But I actually think, like, I don't know how much fantasy value there's going to be, because I think they're going to still play tight end by committee. But I still think it's more likely that the primary move tight end is Kylan Granson this year. Mo Alley Cox has always been an inline tight end for them. Like, I know that Mo Alley Cox, like, looks athletic and he's cool and he's fun. And Jack Doyle has just been like the least athletic guy in the world. Yeah. But like, Jack Doyle's always ran more routes than Mo Alley Cox while they've had that as the platoon. So I think that they know what they have with Cox. And then, Granson is like a more fantasy friendly profile to me than Woods, because when Granson's out on the field, he's there to do one thing. Like, he's running routes. He's not there to block. He wasn't a blocking tight end at SMU. Mm-hmm. He's purely that receiving option. So I think with the year of development that he had, and they got him mixed into the game, I think that he's the guy, if I was to guess, who will lead their tight end room in receptions year 1. That being said, I think that, he's not stopping anybody, right? Neither is Mo Alley Cox. So if Woods it has a really good year of development, I think that he could lead this tight end group in receptions year 1. And I mean, the ceiling is massive. Like, he has that raw athleticism. He's really had an interesting career where he went from quarterback to receiver to eventually finding a home at tight end. And certainly, the way tight ends develop, like, unless you're a first round pick tight end, we shouldn't be counting on year 1 fantasy production. So Woods is a great guy in Dynasty. Stash him on the taxi squad and see if it bears fruit in a couple of years. But it'll be interesting to watch. I think that they have a nice mix of 2 young tight ends that I really like now. And I think there's a decent chance that one of them blossoms into something, this year or in the future.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I think that there's a couple teams right now in the league where it's like, you see some of these rooms and you're like, there's probably 2 options. Someone's going to come out of it on top. And I think that the Colts tight end room is a great example of that. Let's talk about this division before I try to wrap up and get you out of here so I don't steal too much of your time. So you guys came in second in the division. This is an interesting division here. It has a weird resemblance in some ways to my NFC East, where there's like clear cut and not clear cut. It's very weird. Yeah, it's weird. So talk to me about this division, because I think that the Titans are they are descending like as fast as possible to a rebuild as any team. You could not be headed towards a rebuild faster than the Tennessee Titans. And then you have Jacksonville, who just opened the bag, and they're very much like think they're headed in the right direction. We have a new whatever. And then we have the Texans. So talk to me about the AFC South here before I get you out of here.
Yeah, well, first off, I mean, this could be a homer take, but I think the Colts should be pretty heavily favored to win this division.
Oh, yeah.
I think that this division is not good. That's probably not a very controversial take. But yeah, I mean, the Texans are a total mess of an organization. Like, I think they did the right thing and moving off of Watson, getting rid of that, and they're blowing it up and starting from scratch. But it's going to take a while. Like, that team, when Bill O'Brien left, it was just so far behind. So, I'd be surprised if they win many more than 4 or 5 games, to be honest. I think that it's possible that Jacksonville usurps the Titans. You mentioned this, and I think a lot of people are a lot higher on the Titans than they should be, quite frankly. I mean, this is a team that's been thin. They have been really thin. Their best players have been great, but they have a lot of issues, and their offense has essentially been reliant entirely on A.J. Brown and Derrick Henry for a few years now. I mean, we saw that last year where they both got hurt at the same time, and they could not play offense because the rest of their skill positions are just barren without depth. And, we'll see. I like Burks. I think he's going to be interesting long-term, but he has a long way to go. Like, he is not anywhere close to A.J. Brown yet. That's for sure. Yes. And Robert Woods, love him. He's also 30 years old, coming off an ACL tear. I don't know what we can expect out of Robert Woods. And I don't know that I could name the 3rd wide receiver on their depth chart, to be entirely honest right now. So, I don't think the Titans are going to be particularly explosive. And I think if there's questions with Derrick Henry, like he's a 28-year-old running back coming off of a broken foot. Like that's not
And
something.
He didn't look good. Like he looked really bad.
Yeah.
It's not funny. I love you, Derrick Henry, but you just didn't. They forced him back. And that worries me too when organizations are they know like he's all you got. So you got to get him out there type of deal. Like it's a bad look.
Yeah. I mean, I get like people are really down on Cam Akers right now after sort of he had a situation where he came back from a really serious injury way sooner than people thought, did not look in the playoffs. And I get the pedigree is way stronger with Henry, but at the same time, like he's really old. So like to me, it's like your offense depends on a 28-year-old, 250-pound running back with a metal foot. Like that's to me a recipe for questions.
You also pissed off Tannehill. Like you now have a pissed off Tannehill who you have almost openly admitted at this point, like he's not coming back the next year.
Yeah.
And it's just a bad situation. I think the Titans, everyone is still a little bit too high on the Titans. I haven't even looked at what their win total is at. But I think people are a little bit too high on the Titans. What is it?
And I think it's 8.5. And it would be one of my favorite unders. Like, and even their defense, I think their defense has been like their front four is good. I love Simmons, I love Autry, but their secondary is really a problem. And I think that they're just they just don't have enough. So I'm not a big fan of the Titans. And Jacksonville's interesting. Like from a process perspective, to me, they're like the dynasty team that like what has been rebuilding for a couple of years, and then they decided they want to compete, but they're not actually ready to do it. And so they're making a bunch of win now moves, and it's like, well, they're better. Like they are better. They're who they are. It's like they're like the New York Knicks, like every 3 years. Like the Knicks go through
every 3 years.
Where like, they're like, we're blowing it up. And then about 2 years too soon, they're like, we're going to sign a bunch of B-list free agents, and then we're going to compete. And it's like, okay.
It's like that guy in your fantasy leagues that every year he just decides to get rid of like every first round pick that he's been stalking for like years. And then he's like, let me just get rid of all of these for like middle tier potential high ceiling guys. And it's like, you got to put it all together. And that's what I worry about with Jacksonville is just like, I get it on paper. I see, like, I kind of get what you're doing and you're adding depth and you're doing what a team you would think should do. But how are you translating that to the field? Because I'm going to be honest, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, they added a bunch of players that are the players you add when you already have a good team. Like Christian Kirk is a fantastic number 3 receiver and a serviceable number 2 receiver. He's not a number 1 receiver. And I don't know what they're doing with Zay Jones. That doesn't seem like to me the answer at the wide receiver 1 X receiver slot. Marvin Jones is 1 million years old. We'll see what's up with their running back room. I'm really optimistic on Etienne, but there's question marks with his foot situation. We don't necessarily know how that's going to go. And I think the offense will be better. Like I get the idea of just saying like, okay, even if we can't solve all the problems this year, we need to be able to evaluate Lawrence, and we can't evaluate him unless we get professional football players around him.
Right.
And so I think
and then they bring in Evan Ingram. You got Evan Ingram as well. I love that for you guys.
So much Ingram in basketball. It's unbelievable. He's at like 40%. But I think the big thing that I struggle with Jacksonville was I don't understand what they did with the linebacker situation, which is like they go out, they drop a ton of money on Foye Oluokun, which is fine. I think he's a good player, but like history has shown that spending a bunch of money on other teams' off-ball linebackers is usually not a pathway to success because it's such a scheme-dependent position. And then they have pick 33, which I think would have been a great spot to potentially draft a wide receiver who, could potentially be a number 1 long-term next to Kirk. And instead they trade up and they draft another off-ball linebacker. And it's like, to me, like of all the positions on the defense, like if you're rebuilding, to me, it's you rebuild a corner and you rebuild an edge. And then when you already have a good defense, then you go and draft linebackers and safeties. And you're rebuilding. To me, I don't even know why you're building a good defense if you don't have an offense yet. But it's just so weird to me that they spent like 2 of their highest resources on off-ball linebackers when they don't know what their quarterback situation is yet. And it's really weird to me. And then, then they spend the number 1 overall pick on a pass rusher who may or may not be able to rush the passer. So I think it's just an interesting move where they allocated a lot to like tier 2 defensive needs that I think will be really positions you target in like 2024. And so I wish that they had done a little more. I think it's possible they finished second in the division because they're certainly a better roster now than they were at the start of the year. But I really wish that they just like went all out all along. You know what? Number 1 priority, number 2 priority, number 3 priority, number 4 priority is let's have an opportunity to evaluate Trevor Lawrence as the best supporting cast possible. I don't care what our defense is because we're not going to be good enough anyways to win games. And then once we know that we have the pieces in place around Lawrence, once we know that he is the guy, then we're going to start building up the defense. But I think that they're still relying on Lawrence to make a lot of players around him better when, you know, he hasn't showed yet in the NFL that he's a guy that's capable of doing that. I think that they still need to treat him like a rookie, not a god, and put players around him to make him better. And I wish that they had gotten like a true primary option instead of all these secondary and tertiary options. Yeah,
they're very, very frustrating in that they're like trying to be a like win now team without like the win now capability. Whereas like just look at what you have, look at what you need to do. How do we look at the big picture? They're not looking at the big picture. No. Can't stand it. So I think that you're right in that they can finish second in this division. I don't think that outside of the Colts, like, again, I am lower on the Titans than most people are. I'm looking forward to that show of mine because I have a lot of questions surrounding that entire organization. We've seen the Texans, what they've been, but the Colts are in a good spot. And I think that as frustrating as sometimes it has been for the Colts, it's like, I like what they're doing. I like Matty Ice. I like their draft. I'm excited for the Colts. I will leave you with this question. Give me one like hot take that you have for the Colts this upcoming season.
Ooh.
And you can take a second.
Okay. I think if I have one, I think Colts have not had a pass rush in a long time. And this is by far the best. I don't know how much your listeners care about D-line, but this is like my most passionate stance on the Colts right now. It's been like basically since Freeney and Mathis, they have not had a pass rush. And I've never felt as strongly about their front four as they have right now, where Kwity Paye, I thought, had a terrific rookie year. They drafted a developmental guy last year in the second round, Dayo Odeyingbo, who only got into games later in the year because he was coming off a major injury. Then they go and they trade for Yannick. I think the Colts will be top 5 in sacks this year between those 3 guys with DeForest Buckner and everything that Leonard's going to be able to do as a blitzer and Okereke. So I think the Colts are going to be top 5 in sacks. I'll say that they will lead the AFC in sacks this year. And I think it is a team where their defense has been strong in spite of a pass rush. And I think this year, especially with the change to Gus Bradley, who's way more willing to blitz, potentially than what Eberflus was just not willing to. I think it's going to be a fantastic defense this year, and I'm super excited to watch that.
Love it. I agree. That's a great hot take that I can definitely support. Thank you so much for coming on and talking Colts with me. It's been exciting. Some of these teams, you know, it's kind of hard to find the fans. They're far and like sometimes it's not as easy as you would think. So tell everyone again where they can find you, and then I will get you out of here. If you guys play fantasy football and you're not following Jacob, you're doing it wrong. So get your booty over there.
You can find me on Twitter, @FF_RTDB. You can find me recording podcasts pretty darn often. You can find me on Tuesdays, the Full Tilt Dynasty podcast. You can find me Wednesdays, Dynasty Intervention. You can find Cash Considerations, my best ball show, usually Saturdays, but I just go live when I want to go live with it, to be entirely honest. So follow my Twitter for it. And you can find me in the Bulletproof Discord, of course. And so, yeah, check that out. And on all my written work up on Player Profiler, my most recent piece was on my series called The Polarizers, where I'm going through different players that I think have really wide ranges of outcomes and a lot of people with a lot of hot takes. And so I did a deep dive into Gabriel Davis. My next one's going to be likely Amon-Ra St. Brown in that series. So check that out.
Love it.
I hope you enjoyed. And anytime anyone wants to talk Colts with me on Twitter, I'd be more than thrilled to.
Good stuff. And I want to have like a couple people back on to do like division stuff. So I will definitely have you back on. You are a delight. It's been, we haven't been able to do a show in a very long time. The last time that we did a show, we were yelling about
very different quarterback.
Yes, very, very different scenario. But I will see you guys tomorrow, 12 p.m. Eastern, Daily Dozen. If you haven't downloaded the Champions Round app, get in there. We're doing giveaways, tons of good stuff, and I will catch you guys tomorrow. Thanks again, Jakob.
Good luck to the Rangers.